Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. There is a moment in every kingdom's history when the ground shifts beneath its people, and no one notices until it is far too late to turn back. This is one of those moments, because the kingdom believed the worst was already behind them. They believed the war was over, that the wounds had closed, that peace had finally settled over the land like snow after a long winter. They were wrong. For weeks, the Alpha King Adrian had done something none of his people had ever seen him do before. He begged. Night after night, he sent word beyond the palace walls, pleading with a woman he once cast aside to come home. He told himself it was about duty. He told his advisors it was about the stability of the kingdom. But in the quiet hours before dawn, when no one was watching, he admitted the truth to himself alone. He missed her. He missed the woman he had rejected in front of an entire court. The woman whose eyes had once looked at him like he was the center of her world, right before he shattered that world with a single cruel sentence. Her name was Lydia, and when she finally returned, she did not come as the broken woman he remembered. She came with an army. At the front of that army rode a man whose name alone could silence a room. King Lucian Draven, the legendary dragon wolf king. A ruler so old, so powerful, that stories of his reign had become bedtime warnings told to disobedient children in kingdoms he had never even visited. And now, everyone understood the truth that had been hiding beneath the surface of Lydia's quiet grief all along. She was his daughter. Adrian stepped forward when the gates opened, his heart pounding, hope rising in his chest for the first time in months. He believed, foolishly, that this was his chance to apologize, his chance to explain, his chance to fall to his knees in front of everyone and ask for forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve but desperately needed anyway. He never got the chance to speak. King Lucian raised a single hand, and in that instant, hundreds of warriors behind him drew their weapons in perfect, terrifying unison. The sound of steel sliding free echoed across the courtyard like a warning bell. Adrian froze. Every guard on the palace walls froze. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then Lucian looked directly at the man who had rejected his daughter in front of an entire kingdom, and he spoke 5 words. Only 5, but they landed heavier than any declaration of war ever could. "You will never touch my daughter again." Adrian's stomach dropped. This wasn't a warning shouted in anger. This wasn't a father's temporary fury that would fade with time and diplomacy. This was final. This was absolute. This was a line drawn in the earth that no apology, no gift, no grand romantic gesture would ever be allowed to cross. And somewhere behind Lydia, hidden in the shadow of the army, stood a man whose smile no one noticed. A man named Lord Marcus Vale. A man who had spent years quietly pulling strings no one knew existed. Because the war everyone in that courtyard believed was just beginning had actually been planned by him long before the first sword was ever drawn. To understand how they arrived at this moment, you have to go back. Back to the weeks after the rejection, when Adrian's kingdom still believed their king had simply made a difficult political decision. No one knew the truth. No one knew that Adrian himself didn't fully understand what he had done until it was already too late to undo it. He stopped attending the royal celebrations he once loved. The music that used to fill the palace halls felt hollow to him now, like noise designed to distract from silence he couldn't escape. He found himself wandering to the places where he and Lydia once spent quiet evenings together. The garden where she used to sit beneath the old oak tree, the balcony where they once watched the sunset in comfortable silence that needed no words. Each visit was its own quiet punishment. He replayed the moment of rejection over and over in his mind, as if repetition could somehow rewrite the past. He remembered the way Lydia's face had changed the second the words left his mouth. Not anger, not tears at first, just a terrible, quiet stillness, as though something inside her had simply switched off. He remembered how she hadn't argued. She hadn't begged him to reconsider. She had simply turned and walked away and never looked back. And slowly, painfully, Adrian began to understand something about himself that he had spent his whole life avoiding. He hadn't lost Lydia because she was unworthy of him. He had lost her because he let another man's lies matter more than her word. That realization nearly broke him. Because a king who cannot trust his own judgment is a king who has lost the one thing that makes him fit to rule. Eventually, desperate and unable to bear the silence any longer, Adrian sent her a single message. No demands, no excuses, just one honest sentence. I don't expect you to forgive me. I only want the chance to apologize. Lydia read those words in the quiet of her new home, the ancestral palace of her father, a place carved into mountains older than most kingdoms could remember. She read the message twice. Then she set it aside. She didn't answer, because for the first time in her life, Lydia was learning what it felt like to be protected without condition, to belong somewhere without having to prove her worth every single day. Her father's palace didn't just offer her safety. It offered her something she never knew she was missing. A family that chose her without hesitation. But even in that safety, a new mystery was quietly taking shape. Her son, Elias, was not an ordinary child. At first, it was small things. A flicker in his newborn eyes that shouldn't have been possible so soon after birth. A brief shimmer of silver where there should have only been the soft brown of an infant's gaze. Lydia told herself it was a trick of candlelight. She told herself it was nothing. But King Lucian noticed too. And King Lucian did not believe in tricks of candlelight. He watched his grandson closely, night after night, and what he saw unsettled even a ruler who had lived through centuries of war and betrayal. Whenever Elias grew distressed, faint markings would ripple briefly across his tiny arms. Ancient symbols that vanished as quickly as they appeared, symbols Lucian recognized from stories so old they were barely considered history anymore. One evening, he pulled Lydia aside, his expression graver than she had ever seen it. Your son carries something older than either of our kingdoms, he told her. Lydia's breath caught. What does that mean? Lucian said nothing. He simply looked away, his jaw tightening, as though the answer was too heavy to place on her shoulders just yet. That silence became its own kind of fear. Meanwhile, far from the safety of Lucian's mountain palace, Marcus Vale was busy. He met quietly with nobles who had grown resentful of Adrian's rule, feeding their doubts, nurturing their grievances, whispering carefully chosen words into ears that were already primed to listen. He painted a picture of a kingdom on the edge of collapse, a king too consumed with guilt to lead effectively, a throne ripe for the taking. But Adrian's throne was never Marcus's true goal. His real target was much smaller, much more innocent, and far more dangerous to ignore. Elias. Marcus understood something that almost no one else did. If he could control the child, he could control the bloodlines of two of the most powerful kingdoms in the supernatural world. Not through war, not through conquest, through blood itself. He began quietly planning to seize the child during an upcoming diplomatic gathering between Adrian's kingdom and Lucian's, an event meant to symbolize a fragile step toward peace. But even the most careful plans have cracks. And Marcus's plan had one he never saw coming. One of his own spies, a man who had spent months pretending loyalty to Marcus's cause, was secretly devoted to Lydia. When he learned the details of the plot, he risked everything to warn her. The diplomatic gathering arrived under a sky heavy with tension no one dared name aloud. It was the first time Lydia and Adrian would stand in the same room since the day their bond was broken. When Adrian saw her walk in, something in his chest tightened painfully. She looked different, not just older, stronger. The woman standing before him no longer carried herself like someone waiting for his approval. She carried herself like someone who had already found her own worth without him. He approached slowly, almost afraid. "Lydia," he said quietly. She met his eyes, calm and unshaken. "You don't have to explain anymore," she said. The words hit him harder than any accusation could have. Before he could respond, before he could even process the strange mixture of relief and grief in her voice, the lights in the grand hall suddenly went dark. Screams erupted. Guards rushed forward blindly in the chaos. Someone moved quickly through the panicked crowd, heading straight for Elias. Adrian didn't think. He moved on instinct alone, placing himself between the shadowy figure and Lydia without a single moment of hesitation. For the first time since the night, he destroyed everything between them. Adrian protected Lydia and asked for nothing in return. The attacker vanished into the chaos before the guards could reach them, but he left behind a message that would haunt the room long after the lights came back on. The child belongs to the ancient bloodline. That night, King Lucian finally told Lydia the truth he had been holding back. Her family's power was never simply about strength or lineage. Generations ago, her ancestors served as the original guardians of a sacred covenant, a covenant that had once united two opposing wolf kingdoms locked in devastating war. That covenant had kept a fragile peace for centuries, and Elias was the first child born in generations, carrying both bloodlines within him. That made him precious. It also made him a target. There was one more secret Lucian had been carrying, one that finally connected every terrible piece of the puzzle. Marcus Vale was descended from the very family that had betrayed the original guardians centuries ago. For years, he had been quietly manipulating Adrian's court, planting seeds of doubt long before Lydia ever entered the picture. The rejection that shattered Lydia's world hadn't been a simple misunderstanding. It had been engineered, carefully, patiently, by a man whose entire bloodline existed for the sole purpose of driving these two kingdoms apart. When Adrian finally uncovered undeniable proof of Marcus's manipulation, something inside him cracked open completely. "I didn't reject Lydia because I stopped loving her," he whispered to himself in the empty halls of his palace. "I rejected her because I was too afraid to believe her." That admission became the hardest lesson of his life. His greatest enemy was never Marcus Vale. It was his own pride. When Marcus finally launched his final attack, storming forward with the confidence of a man who believed his plan was flawless, he discovered too late that his greatest miscalculation was assuming Adrian and Lucian would never stand together. But they did. For the first time in generations, two kingdoms that had spent years locked in quiet hostility fought side by side. Lydia refused to hide behind palace walls while her son's fate hung in the balance. She stood beside her father, fierce and unshaken, protecting Elias with a strength that startled even the warriors around her. Adrian watched her in the middle of that chaos, and he understood, perhaps for the first time completely, exactly who she had become. Not the frightened mate he had once cast aside. Not a woman waiting quietly for his forgiveness or his approval. A woman who had discovered a strength inside herself that no rejection could ever touch again. Marcus was defeated, his carefully constructed plan collapsing around him in the chaos of battle. But even as he fell, he refused to let the moment end quietly. "You think this war is over?" he sneered, blood on his lips, eyes blazing with something between madness and satisfaction. "You still haven't discovered what lives beyond the northern mountains." The entire battlefield fell silent. In the aftermath, as the kingdom began to breathe again, Adrian finally approached Lydia. He didn't kneel. He didn't beg. He simply looked at her, stripped of every excuse he once hid behind. "I was wrong," he said. "I know," Lydia answered. "Can I ever earn your trust again?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at Elias, sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of how close they had come to losing everything. "Trust isn't something you ask for after destroying it," she finally said. "It's something you rebuild." Adrian accepted her answer without argument, without pressure, without demanding more than she was willing to give. And in that quiet acceptance, Lydia saw something in him she hadn't seen since before everything fell apart. Genuine change, not performed for an audience, not offered as a bargain, simply real. Sometimes the person who breaks your heart isn't the one who destroys you. Sometimes their betrayal becomes the very moment you finally discover who you truly are. Lydia didn't become powerful because she was the daughter of a king. She became powerful the moment she stopped needing anyone's permission to know her own worth. And Adrian learned, in the hardest way possible, that love without trust can quietly become a prison. But love rebuilt through honesty, patience, and true accountability can grow into something far stronger than what existed before. But this story is not finished. Not yet. As the two kingdoms celebrated their hard-won victory, as laughter and relief finally returned to a court that had spent so long living in fear, Lydia stepped away from the celebration and looked toward the northern mountains. Something was moving beyond that ancient border. Something that had been waiting patiently, silently, for Elias to be born. And when the first low howl echoed across those distant peaks, carrying down into the valley like a warning older than the kingdom itself, King Lucian's face went pale in a way Lydia had never seen before. "No," he whispered. Lydia turned to him, her heart suddenly racing. "Father, what is it?" Lucian's voice, when it finally came, was barely above a breath. "The firstborn has awakened." And for the first time in Lydia's life, she watched fear settle over the face of a man who had never once shown fear before. Even the legendary dragon Wolf King, ruler of one of the most powerful kingdoms in the supernatural world, stood frozen beneath that mountain sky. Because whatever was coming next was something even he had never prepared for. If you made it this far, let us know in the comments what you think is waiting beyond those mountains. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you're here when the next chapter of this story begins.